Thank you, Greg. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. I'm really excited for this presentation. And so one of the things that before I jump right into the images, I'm going to try and not just do this like this PowerPoint presentation. If you have questions, I'm okay with you saying like, hey, I have a question, because that is way more fruitful than just me being a talking head and talking at the audience online too. So if you have questions, let me know. With 92 works on view and nearly 90% of those works coming from the KIA's collection, Africa Imagined Reflections on Modern and Contemporary Art is an exhibition that displays several new works of African and American art that we acquired for the collection. Last winter, as we were working to acquire specifically some of these new works that were African sculptures and masks, I began thinking about an exhibition that would not only showcase our newest treasures, but that would also demonstrate how these latest works are actually in conversation with existing collection works created by European and American artists. As many of you know, the KIA prides itself in presenting works that illuminate the vast and rich cultures which make the American experience so distinct and multifaceted. And as you know, our tagline is always, the arts are for everyone. So I think that in Africa Imagined, I was hoping that this show really embodied that principle. And so okay, I didn't hit it right. Okay, there we go. Africa Imagined is an exhibition that was born out of this idea and interest in exploring how African art has deeply impacted the aesthetics of European and American modern art. In undertaking this exhibition, I saw an opportunity to discuss how African art extends deeply also into contemporary art practice. As we know, contemporary art, or the art that is being made during our lifetime, is a response for the events or to the events happening today. And those events are certainly informed by the varying and diverse histories and experiences of peoples across the globe. And so looking at this particular show, you know, thinking about modern art, it was contemporary art. And so it really is important to understand that the art of that time reflects the overarching sentiments and beliefs of society, some of which we no longer find tolerable. So the show itself is kind of a little bit a timeline, but also it goes back and forth between the past and the present. And so this exhibition looks at the complexities of African art and illuminates how modern and contemporary artists have been interested, taken inspiration from, and responded to this incredibly complex and fascinating tradition of art making that has spanned the African continent. While the exhibition does touch on three key themes that we've talked about before, I'm sorry, I'm thinking my PowerPoint is going a little haywire, I apologize. It touches on three key themes of escapism, social inquiry, and celebration or cultural reclamation, which is something I've been saying. Celebration is something I really like. It's not physically organized in those categories. In fact, when you walk through the exhibition, you'll start to see other things that are happening, right? You'll start to see other themes that are emerging. You'll start to see formalistic comparisons that are being made. And so some of the things that you'll see are manhood, labor and economics, motherhood, family, spiritual practices, and more. So it's really during the early to mid 20th century that African art had Europe and the United States excited and filled with new ideas and energy about arts and art making. And during that time, the avant-garde discovered the aesthetic properties of African art: bold, stylized figures, energetic and repetitive lines, unique patterning, vibrant coloring. And those elements provided them with a freedom from longstanding art practices. And as a result, artists began using African and other non-Western symbols and forms. So in some instances, the artist's adoption of these new and modern aesthetics prompted a more exoticized view of African art and artists. And while the exhibition does acknowledge this unfortunate fact, in some ways you will see artists in this presentation and in Africa Imagine employing these exoticized notions. It's also important to look at how artists of the era through today were inspired by African art. Artists that used African art for inspiration, they begin to explore new ways of making work by responding to and even reclaiming African art and culture. And what you'll see through this presentation and physically as you walk through the exhibition is, as a result, there are conversations that are created with history, with the artist's heritages, and other cultures that foster a better understanding of and appreciation for the complexities of African art. There's a real acknowledgement of the humanity of the people of Africa and their art making practice, because these artists are investigating African art and come to understand that African art and artists are honoring their ancestors, their communities, and the natural and spiritual worlds, and that these cultures have hundreds of years of tradition that has been passed down. And so that very notion negates the idea of African art as being inferior to Western art. And so I do want to also acknowledge the fact that this is not the KIA's first exhibition that has explored African art. In 1969, we had an exhibition at the KIA called The Art of Black Africa in Oceania. And the director at that time, Harry Griever, said the purpose behind the exhibit is to show this work as art, since there still is the unawareness and disbelief over both the importance and the pure strength and beauty of this art, both as a separate entity to itself and as a bridge to other forms of art. And so I'm going to go through and also let you know that I have some quotes that I'll use in this presentation and that you will also see in this exhibition that really just emphasize some of the certain moments and points. And so I had one there I didn't realize. I'm going to move on to Picasso, which Greg kind of gave you an introduction there. And he is one of these artists that, there we go, sorry. He is one of these artists that we definitely say in 1907, the visit to the Trocadero is very important. But he also, says some things about African art that we find really, where he's saying the masks are not like other sculptures, not at all, they're magical things. And we didn't realize, and he calls them that primitive and not magical. And saying that African pieces are intercessors, and that they stood against everything, the whole, against the unknown, threatening the spirits, and just saying he was always looking at fetishes. And he understood too that he was an agent against everything. And so looking at this particular work, Tête de Homme à la Pipe reflects those influences, because he goes on, like Greg was saying earlier, to create Cubism. He also is really responsible for another movement we've called Surrealism, and we will actually have a show soon called Surrealish coming up. And so in that work, it looks at the artist's lifelong experimentation with drawing and printmaking. The etching, the angular forms and the lines, they shift and merge. And the composition's central figure is obscured and fragmented by geometric planes. And we can see these connections to African art with the forms looking to be in very rhythmic motion. Okay. And so the next artist, Erte, I'm just going to say his name because that's how he's popularly referenced. He was one of the best known Art Deco artists from the 1930s. He was a Russian-born French artist and was known for his drawings and illustrations of slim, elegant figures, exquisitely clad in imaginative and colorful costumes. And so while this is a work called Kante Hindu, which is translated as Hindu Tale, It depicts a figure characterized by sharp, flat, and stencil-like imagery, but unlike his popular illustrations of fashion models, it depicts a black semi-nude figure in chains. Restraints are at the wrist and waist, along with a loincloth, feature corresponding intricate patterning, and it's clearly Art Deco in style. And however, the man's distressed posture, his gaze, his attire, along with physical characteristics, make this image somewhat a little unsettling. And again, this is one of those images that I was talking about, these periods in time where this would have certainly have been acceptable in his day. And while viewers, we can't be certain of his intent, it does highlight a potential exploitive gaze and the fraught relationship between Western and non-Western cultures. And so the current image of Le Corbusier, also known as Charles Edward Jeanneret, was a Swiss-French architect, designer, and painter. He was a pioneer of modern architecture. So in 1953, Le Corbusier creates a series of pastel sketches that he then revisits 12 years later as a aquatint and etching portfolio. It's a portfolio of 20 images entitled Unité, or Unity. The background of the composition is broken into these 3 sections, punctuated by blue, green, and red. And we can actually see sort of the idea of Cubist influences as far as the fractured pictorial plane, but also a little surrealistic tendencies. This is definitely, you can see the Cubist and Purist impulses, and this particular image itself represents the desire of Le Corbusier to display the complexities of life in intuitive forms, bold color, and dynamic lines. And remember, that was another element that I said that the artists of that era really did look to African art within their own works. And so this work is by Adolphe Dane, who was another notable lithographer of the 20th century. This was created a year before his death, and it illustrates his exploration of new techniques and textures that expanded the scope of lithography, using touche, which is a liquid lithographic medium that allows fluid effects. The artist created an appearance of a wash. It suggests a cloudy sky. And in the lower foreground, we see hazy figures emerging, perhaps suggesting groups of people. And there's an area effect with this sort of mode that he employs. And so he rose to fame during the 1940s. And as a result of his success, this allowed him to travel to various places around the globe, such as Cuba, Haiti, the Yucatan, Italy, Greece, Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, and India. But there are no real official records of him visiting the African continent. And so his unfamiliarity with people and cultures he encountered while traveling may certainly be a source of inspiration. It does reflect the artist's interest in new lithography techniques, while also his impression of exotic places that he visited previously. This work is by Robert Motherwell. He's considered one of the forerunners of abstract expressionism. He completed the Africa Suite in 1970s, and it was his first project entirely devoted to silkscreens. The particular works in this exhibition are 7 and 10, and they really stand crisply against off-white backgrounds. And so in 1944, the artist wrote, "All of my works consist of a language between the conscious, straight lines, design shapes, weighted color, abstract language, and the unconscious, soft lines, obscured shape, automatism, resolved into a synthesis." And so his exploration of automatism, which is a method of art making focused on the subconscious, can really be traced back to his relationship with a group of Parisian surrealists and the French symbolist poet Arthur Rimbaud, who helped inspire surrealism. So in his 1946 essay, Beyond Aesthetics, Motherwell discusses Rimbaud's expedition to Africa and compares the journey to the Surrealist break from Dada. And so this sort of break with intellectual pursuits for a life centered on traveled and adventure, the Surrealists rejected Dada's sort of satirical and impractical aesthetic. And so for Motherwell, the subject of Africa represented a similar journey for himself, a clear break from the past and a leap into the unknown. And so I move on to another section, like I was saying before, celebration and reclamation. And really, one of my favorite authors, Bell Hooks, who recently left us last month, she says, if one can make a people lose touch with their capacity to create, lose sight of their will and their power to make art, then the work of subjugation of colonization is complete. Such work can be undone only by acts of concrete reclamation. And this is actually one of the, I want to say one of the quotes that I didn't use in the exhibition, or maybe I have several. And one of the things that I wanted to say with this quote is that looking at that, people do have to learn. I think we had an artist here, I know, Todd Gray was here a couple of months ago, and he talked about this idea of mental colonialism and unlearning things that have been taught to us in the past. And that's something too that I think art can do, is to teach us to unlearn some of the things that we thought previously. And so this is one of our newer works that we actually acquired. And this is a hornbill beak mask. And so among the bois, representational masks like this depict nature spirits that are responsible for life in our world. And so the spirits manifest via natural forces of nature and the cycles of life. And so masks in these societies symbolized Dwo, the creator spirit's son, and Dwo is believed to serve as an intermediary between humans and the spirit world. He is a messenger, and so birds are thought of as messengers. And so the pair of figures crowning the mask at the very top that you can see portray the spirit beings who are thought to live in male and female pairs and have families, similar to humans. This is another work in the show. I thought it was really important to include Elizabeth Catlett. This is her response to Margaret Walker's poem, For My People. Walker and Catlett were both alumni from the University of Iowa, but also roommates during their time there. You can actually scan a code when you see the exhibition and listen to a reading of For My People, which is very, very beautiful. And it takes Walker's poem and transforms the same author's words into iconic images. This particular image is really very much one of the works that I find quite striking. At the bottom of the particular image, it's the fifth of 6 plates. There are stripes of yellow, orange, red, purple, blue, and green. And they're in varying proportions, as you can see. And then you see several different people. There are 9 different, sometimes mask-like faces, and some of them are in profile and others are facing frontally. And above the circle, the artist places this sort of field of blue at the top. And together, for me, the elements signal the promise of a bright future, which can only be realized through unity. And so Catlett has always said about her work, I've always wanted to art to service my people, to reflect us, to relate to us, to stimulate us, and to make us aware of our potential. This is another new acquisition. This is Gwanda Sioux, a female figure, or Gwanda Sioux. And in Bamana culture, the initiation into specific society leads to obtaining social and spiritual knowledge. And so you have to study for 6 years to get into the Jo Society, which is a society found primarily in southern Mali. And the society's leadership commissions and care for these sculptures that illustrate their cultural beliefs and morals. And so these are very grand. This is a very large figure. They are used to have a incredible detailing of accuracy to emphasize the figure's power and Joe rituals such as initiation, healing, and social responsibilities. And they're used in Guan, which is a subsection of Joe associated with fertility and childbirth. And this woman may be associated with Guandasu, as I referenced earlier, a name that suggests determination, power, and vitality. This is Joshua Klaas. He's an artist that layers, makes collages of overlaying prints and drawings that reflect on his musings about community, identity, and cultural memory. And for him, they serve as metaphors for the fragmentation of African American identity. And he said about his work, it's also about a beauty that comes from adapting and thriving in that fractured relationship to America and Africanness. This is our latest acquisition. We just recently acquired this work last month. So how did I get that in here, right? That's what you're saying. Like, how did that happen? Well, we were in the process of acquiring this. Some of our, like many of you may or may not know, it takes quite a while for us to acquire works. And so this was something that had been in the works for quite some time, and I managed to sneak this new acquisition in time. And so this artist is Charles Searles. He is from that PAFA group of painters, or Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. He's very much influenced by AfriCobra, which is a 1970s Chicago-based group of Black artists who sought to translate elements of African and African American culture in their artworks. And so after he takes a trip to West Africa, he really comes back very much a changed man. Previously, he had been doing work that was a bit more representational and abstract, but he was very much into the patterning and the culture that he experienced, and he begins to just completely work in this vein. So many of his works from the 70s on take this sort of Afrocentric inspiration with the patterning, with the themes. This particular work is called Two Dancers. One of the things that you'll see throughout the exhibition is we have several figures that are like dancers. They say worshipers or devotees, and they are actually, really much in the same vein. So being a dancer also can mean that you can be a worshiper, right? And so that is one of the things that really I thought was such a beautiful thing about this. And when you first look at this, you think maybe they're twins, but then you start to see these little details that emerge that show you they are not twins. They are two distinct women. They have maybe some of the same garment patterning, but they're very different. And so his official biography states this about the Dancer series, because this is from that period, that this marked a change in his life, celebrating a new sense of renewal and the African experience. And that this series, this body of work, really marked his life and work forever. And so we are very pleased to show this. This is another new work to the collection. And so these figures were possibly made for a shrine and dedicated to one of the Yoruba Orisha deities. That's what Orishas are, they're deities. Potentially Shango. Shango in Yoruba chronology was the fourth king of ancient Oyo town, is highly respected and considered a central deity in the Yoruba religion essay. He is the god of lightning and thunder, the provider of children, and the guardian of twins. Shango can also be a symbol of kings and warrior, and frequently depictions of Shango worshippers show figures kneeling in reverence. But interestingly, these Shango priests and diviners, they're clearly standing, which makes them very special. The priest holds the main symbol of Shango in his right hand, a once double-headed axe staff. The diviner wears an eleke, which is a necklace of protection, and in her right hand grasps a gourd rattle, which is another instrument of Shango worship. And then the use of their left hand signal an event beyond the realms of the natural world. The man touches the top of his head, perhaps invoking Shango, while her left shoulder and hand, the woman balances what appears to be, I'm thinking, and I will firmly state that this is my supposition here, that it is potentially a rope of kola nuts or cowrie shells and beads, all three of which are divination tools. So that's how we make that sort of distinction between who is the priestess and who is the priest and who is the diviner. Another work, and so as you can see, I haven't said this, but you can see that over and over again, I've been speaking about these African works, and I'm talking about them in a context of their sort of use, right? So all of the works that you will see when it relates to the African works, they're all activated. And that's something really central that you should take away from this exhibition, is that African art really holds this place where they are fulfilled through their use, right? Their use to their community, through the individual use. They are really power symbols. And they're also symbols that bring accord, that pay respect to ancestors, and that pass on tradition. And that's the thing that's really central to many of the varying cultures that you'll see. Yes, hi. Right, so the last one, we have not done the dating that we normally would, and so, or not normally would, but that we haven't done the dating, right? But the evidence suggests from our inspection that they're about early 20th century, which is a good era to be in at this particular point with all the sort of provenance era things that are happening now in the field. The Guandasu was early 20th century as well. Okay. So this is a really interesting work. The moment I saw this particular work, and this is the thing I have to tell you, putting together this exhibition was like such a joy. I was really excited by it because I got to go into our collection storage, and it literally was one of those things, like I had an idea about some of the themes and things I wanted to see, but there were other times I just didn't know, and I just went in and was looking. And this is one of those works that I looked at and I said, oh, this is really great. And you know, I really do have to give a lot of credit to our curatorial fellow, Eunice. She helped out with a lot of the research. And this is a beautiful work that is called Ezekiel's Wheel, which is by Richard Black. And he served as a professor of art and printmaking at Drake University. And his wheel is an abstract interpretation of the biblical narrative of Ezekiel's wheel, right? A vision of four wheels that illustrates the spiritual divine essence of God and his omnipresence in our reality. So one of the things that, like I said to you earlier, why I kind of made this comment about the sort of spiritual aspect of the work that's in these, spiritual aspect of the African works that are in this show, that's a similar thing that you will see in modern and contemporary references within the show. You will see works that have this sort of spiritual connection. And so Dr. Elizabeth Pruitt, who is an archaeologist who teaches anthropology at the University of Maryland, states that the wheel-like image in the book of Ezekiel and the cosmogram represented the universe and the path we travel through this world and the afterlife, which is something that 100% recalls African spirituality traditions, right? These are works by, we have two, actually what's really lovely about this, another lovely point about this show, is that we have Fakaye sculptures. This is Aduwu Fakaye, who is the father of Lamidi Fakaye, who we have two works by in this show. And so the Yoruba people of Nigeria have one of the highest birth rates of twins in the world. So with 45 of every 1,000 children being born a twin, there's also a high mortality rate. So in Yoruba culture, twins are considered to possess special powers. They are believed to be one soul and must be cared for accordingly. So if a twin dies in infancy, the family has a wooden figure carved to represent the deceased twin. And these carvings are called Erbiji. Erebiji, which means sacred, and Ibi means born, and Iji means two. So Eri means sacred, Ibi means born, and Iji means two. And so the carving has a number of characteristics: the conical head, an elaborate hairstyle, roundness of the eyes and facial features, and a balanced composition. So these figures are, like I said, they were cared for and employed with the death of a twin. And so I should note that Fakaye, he comes from a family of carvers. Lamidi Fakaye would have been the fifth generation, fifth generation, and there's still Fakayes today that are still carving. I believe his nephew is in Texas. So that's really wonderful to know. And again, remember I say this thing earlier, that the tradition of African art is really passed down. It becomes a familial and community tradition that is passed down from very deliberately. This is one of my favorite works in the show. So, Micheline Thomas, you're gonna give me the love I need. It presents the reclining figure of a woman. This is a familiar pose known as the odalisque. Let me see if I can get our odalisque up so you can see the example I'm making. So this is the odalisque, right? And so when you normally see these images, they're traditionally reclining nude women. They're portrayed by European male painters, and they really symbolize the sexual availability or the idealization of women being submissive. But in Thomas's hands, this woman is fully clothed. She's in a V-neck blouse. She's very stylishly attired, and she's in stylish, sumptuous surroundings, and she really is meeting the viewer's eye. So if you're gonna see the difference here with the odalisque is not gonna be so brazen, and I'm gonna say that word brazen, because that would be considered not submissive, right? If you're meeting the viewer's eye. But this woman is saying, no, I am not an object, and I'm not to be toyed with. And I love that piece. I love this piece for that. It's really a lovely proclamation of womanhood. And then this is Oisoyen, which are listed or used by Yoruba herbalists and priests. And the Oisoyen staff is used for the spirit of herbal medicines, or Opa Enri, which is the spirit that works against mental and physical illness caused by malevolent forces in individuals. So the Yoruba believe the power of Oisoyen is vested in wrought iron staff that is placed on altars for this particular orisha. And so the staff itself is composed of smaller birds and a shaft in the middle that elevates a larger bird. And again, this is another case, even though this is a completely different, not necessarily the same culture that I was talking about before, because remember I was talking about earlier the hornbill beak mask. This is another African culture where birds are emissaries for one of the other deities. And this emissary is Ogun, who is the god of iron, right? Okay, so now we're at inquiry and I'm finishing up. And again, I use this quote by Bell Hooks, and I really like it because this is the quote that I use at the end of the exhibition. And it's a bit more abbreviated than this, but she says, I ask that we consider this perspective from which we look, vigilantly asking ourselves, who do we identify with? Whose image do we love? It is only as we collectively change the way we look at ourselves and the world that we can change how we are seen. In this process, we seek to create a world where everyone can look at Blackness and Black people with new eyes. And I would say that this very sentiment can also extend beyond Black people. when you say, for the purposes of this particular writing, when it was made, it was talking about representation of Black people culturally in the mainstream and external and outside of the mainstream. But really, I think that this quote can be extended universally and be applied to everyone. We need to change how we look at ourselves and how we are seen. And that's the power of bell hooks. I could stop right now, right? Because I love her, how her mind has worked how her mind worked. And let's see. Trying. Okay. Oh no, there we go. William Majors. So William Majors is a Midwesterner. He's someone that was born in Indiana, and he eventually moves on to New York, but only after going abroad to study. He went to both the Cleveland School of Art and the University of Indiana's John Herron Art School. And his main interests were representing abstract representations of biblical stories. So remember I talked about Richard Black and the Ezekiel's Will just a moment ago. This here is another way that people were talking about spiritual connections and spirituality in a very abstract manner. And so he goes to Italy, and at some point he always is really an abstractionist. He really commits to that. Once he moves to New York, he's really meets Richard Mayhew and becomes very fast friends. Richard Mayhew introduces him to the Spiral Group. And Spiral Group is a collective of Black artists like Romare Bearden, and they are all about promoting the civil rights and Black artists. But what's interesting about Majors is he doesn't stay with them very long, not because of any real thing, but he uses his artwork in a way where it's very much different. He's not necessarily interested in proclaiming the Black experience as much as he is wanting to talk about the universality of spiritual practice, which is really very interesting. And I think, like I said, it connects so much to the other work that I was looking at. He's really looking at his works as being the impetus for spiritual contemplation, which is very introspective and something that you can look at. Remember, I was talking about the Gwanda Sue earlier, the female figure that was very large. That's about spiritual contemplation. So we see this idea of representational objects that represent the spiritual practice, spiritual contemplation, but then we also look at works and we see works that are about spiritual practice and spiritual contemplation, but in a two-dimensional way. Out of Gottlieb is another artist that you'll see in this show. He was an avid collector of African and Oceanic and pre-Columbian indigenous American art, and really he takes the language from those cultures and begins to translate them into these simple and yet complex paintings and prints. They're called pictographs that come up during the 40s and 50s. These are really, those are really precursors to the particular work that I'm talking about right now. Figure 8 really signals his transition from utilizing non-Western cultural signifiers. I just really wanted to make sure that he was included in this presentation just because he was very much an important artist in modernism. And you can still see those sort of pictographs influences. He really is about using the symbols and the shapes to strip down and communicate a universal sort of language. He wants people, again, to contemplate and connect that way. this is Kara Walker, and so she borrows 18th and 19th century practice of paper portrait silhouettes. She reintroduced this unique art form to contemporary art. And so she recreates narratives from the antebellum South that recast racial stereotypes and plantation mythologies. And so she recalls this imagery of African Americans from minstrel shows and artworks. And so her artworks are really charged, and they show her subjects in demeaning positions with exaggerated physical attributes and physically and sexually abusive situations. I must say that. But the thing that I want everyone to take away from it is that these are hard images to look at. Her images are hard because she's wanting to sort of reject the romanticization of the antebellum period. So when you think about the enslaved and the antebellum period, her whole aim is to give you such jarring imagery that you have to rethink that narrative. And so in I'll Be a Monkey's Uncle, it features a barefoot African American girl, and she's wringing a cloth, and a squat, presumably male figure, and with a long monkey tail faces her, and he reaches out with these claw-like hands. And so the title of Walker's work is an expression of surprise or improbability of a situation. It has the sarcastic phrase has its roots in late 19th century beliefs in the supernatural origins of man that rejected the theory of apes and man sharing an ancestor. And so Walker's use of this zoomorphic figure and the work's title are ironic and noteworthy, and they allude to racist stereotypes that dehumanize African Americans by comparing their physical characteristics and behaviors to that of animals. And so that image is really kind of interesting to have it in the show, because here she's using her work as a way of inquiry, right? Again, this is this notion of, oh, the antebellum South, it was so lovely. And so she takes that narrative right away and does not allow you to even remotely think that. This is Afro-American Express, which is by Hank Willis Thomas, and it's really his reflection on the idea of how credit cards are used in our society, and the idea that there is an illusion of individual buying power, while also alluding to the industry from which America and Europe's wealth was amassed, which is the slave trade. It speaks about how credit cards can be a form of financial access or indebtedness, right? So it can provide people with the ability to pay for their daily necessities and, also financial hardships, but then it also can cause financial hardship. So there is definitely a double entendre included. And then this is another work, Sheila Pre-Bright's Suburbia series, and it was really interesting. I asked her recently, was she trying to recreate this sort of odalisque figure again, this reclining nude, or not reclining nude, but reclining figure, sort of recasting it. And she said no, she hadn't even seen that until we started talking about it. But this is her inquiry and investigation into images of African Americans, and the idea that at the time when she started taking this up, I want to say the date of creation is 2004, that she was really looking at how African American culture was being portrayed in the media, how it was being depicted. And she was like, this doesn't, at all reflect my experience. So she began going into neighborhoods, going into neighborhoods and neighbors' homes. Like, this is someone that she lives near, that allowed her to come into her home. And I love this idea of the way she used light to maybe obscure the figure's identity and ethnicity. And also just the way the magazine also obscures her identity, because she wants to play with this idea. It's like, is there an idea of a Black home, or is there an idea of a white home? And sort of really talk about this perceived line that we have in society is really not there at all. This is Elenatsu. He's very widely known as a sculptor for his bottle top and 10 installations with glass. He makes them with or aluminum pieces that are sourced from alcohol recycling station, and then they're sewn together with copper wire. So this particular image kind of references the way of those works. And I haven't talked much about the fiber traditions within the different African cultures, but there definitely is that allusion there. I talked just a little briefly about Searles in the Searles painting. So copper Edie with black, it mimics the forms found in Enatsu's aluminum-based tapestry. The surface of the print, it shimmers and ripples depending upon the viewer's vantage point. And actually, this particular work is kind of exciting because you can change how it's situated. So it can hang vertically or it can hang horizontally. And one of the things that I really like about this is that it investigates the boundaries and qualities of his chosen medium while serving as a critique on Western consumerism. I read this and I couldn't believe this, but it says used electronics, scrap metal, and other waste sites in Ghana pose immense health and social crises, with the Agbokbloshi dump in Accra being one of the world's largest. So like literally any sort of electronics, like it's not just from Ghana, it's from all over. Like there, it has the largest dump and it's causing health issues. So I thought that was kind of very interesting that here you have this idea of an artist who is not only talking about the environment, but also our consumerism, and it also embeds this idea of health, like a health emergency and health crisis in it. Okay, and then Ken Gonzalez Day is another artist. Like many of the works that you'll see on display, he goes into different collections and begins to photograph them. He made these constellations. This is the Africa constellation, by taking individual pictures of these sculptures and then compiling them into this composite. And so he really uses this cluster to allude to the plunder of African art and artifacts, as well as the history of collecting and presenting these objects to support Western notions of cultural superiority. And then this is one of my favorite new acquisitions as well. This is by Brent Harris, who draws inspiration for his work from Nkisi and Kandi, which are power figures that originate from the Congo. I want to see if I can get this, because there are a couple of other works here that are, this is the Nkisi, let me see, right there. Figure. And so those works are really serve as vessels, and with which oaths are made to resolve disputes, or they serve as guardians for harm. The beauty of these objects, they're imbued with power. They symbol an accord has been reached, a deal has been reached, and that the moment that you drive that piece of metal into that figure, it's it. That's it. The agreement is it. You have agreed. They have agreed, and you are supposed to walk away with that being settled. I really love that idea, but I think the one thing that Harris does is he extends that by saying the work is called Diasporic Spirit. It envisions the souls of our ancestors as they are released from this world and transition into the next. I think that that's such a beautiful idea, that there's this idea of a state of transition and a releasing of the ancestors into the next world, and that the wood itself is carved and burned intuitively. The heat from the torch flame brings out texture and fissures inherent in the wood. So not only is he alluding to the ancestors being sort of this shifting and moving in transition, but he's also saying the figure is kind of emerging itself, right? It's already in the wood. That's a really lovely idea. And again, these are two other works by Ladislas Segi and Martin Craig. Ladislas Segi, both of which I also say are, again, sort of interpretations or investigations of the Nkisi and Kandi. Segi was a huge collector of African art, And so you can definitely see that. And Martin Craig was actually a scientist that trained himself how to cast bronze, and then eventually becomes a teacher in the New York area. And this is almost my last slide. This is Shakaya Booker. So like I was saying earlier about the Elanatsu having this sort of environmental connection, she has since the 1980s and 90s transformed discarded tires into these striking and abstract compositions or sculptures. And so her interest in rubber as an artistic medium grew while she was living in the East Village during a period when the neighborhood was overrun with vacant lots, graffiti, and waste. And so these commanding sculptures explore a range of issues, such as industrial waste and decline, or the constructs of race and class. And then I also suggested her works hint at the cultural and historical association of the medium. So for those of you that don't know, Belgium used to have a reliance on exploited African labor in the Congo to harvest the rubber plant. They actually had a lot of brutal practices during the time of King Leopold. And so the idea is that she's also kind of alluding to that sort of that remnant history there, right? And so this is a labor-intensive process that involves slicing, twisting, and reaming. And so she reshapes the material used by many commercial products into these intricate and evocative forms, right? And so minor illusion is something that I believe asks viewers to consider our roles within a system that causes our society to abuse its natural resources, and as a result negatively impact our environments and people. And so I'll leave you with this quote by Carter G. Woodson, who was a child of former slaves, who was a graduate of Berea College, the University of Chicago, and Howard University, where he received his PhD. He also founded the Association for Study of Negro Life and History, a society that was dedicated to the preservation of African and American history. He was also responsible for National Negro History Week in the second week of February, which was started in 1926. We now call it Black History Month. And it was formally designated as such by President Gerald R. Ford in 1976. And so he says, the fact is that we know less about Africa than any other part of the world. And mind you, this was in 1947, he was saying this. The ancients knew more about Africans who came into the Mediterranean world than they knew of the Africans in their home. Herodotus said that the Phoenicians visited part of the continent as far as the equator, 6 centuries before Christ. Until about 1850, Africa in the mind of the modern world was a series of coastlines. Americans and Europeans are still practically on the outside looking at the continent through a glass darkly. The trouble in this case results from the belief that differences in culture imply superiority or inferiority. And I leave you with that because that is at the heart of this exhibition. I was so pleased to find my own copy. I brought it with me. For those of you this is treasured, you're more than welcome to look at my 9th edition. But Dr. Woodson started this labor of love in the 1920s, and he would continue to revise this book for every 2 years. So there's several editions, and so I have the 1947. I'm thankful to have the 1947 version, but he's the reason why we know so much about African art, the continent of Africa, the African American contributions to our way of life in America. And I really want to make sure I acknowledge him today on this day in February and thank him. And I thank you. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. questions? I know I was down to the wire. Got through it. And thank you for your question earlier. I see one of the artists in the there's Brent Harris. You should ask him about his work, his fantastic work. I'm really happy. He's very well deserved to be in the KIA's collection. Okay. Well, I hope you have a wonderful Tuesday. Thank you so much.